Well, I'm delighted to spend the next couple of minutes with the face of football in Asia, the former Premier League commentator and, goal rush anchor. John Dykes joins me from Singapore to dissect his broadcasting career and, of course, Liverpool's road to their Premier League success this very season. He's one man who's covered the Premier League for 7 good years. Covering everything you need to know. Talk about interviews, talk about goal rush and everything. He's covered other sports as well. Name it, cricket, rugby. He's someone who's an expert in almost all the fields of sports. Ladies and gentlemen, John Dykes joins me from Singapore this morning. Well, it's afternoon over there. John, good to have you here.
Guys, it's great to be with you.
Good morning to you, and I've been enjoying the show so far.
And of course, John, let's kickstart the show this morning. It's the first time you are appearing on a Nigerian TV, and I'm so delighted to have you here this morning. Now, let's talk about the early days of your broadcasting career. Tell us how it all started for you.
Okay, well, it all started a long, long way from Nigeria. Obviously, I have appeared on Nigerian TV during all that time that I was presenting Premier League from the UK.
Yeah.
And of course, when I came to Africa and worked on World Cup football and covered European Championship. But my career started back in, a long time ago. I don't think I'll tell you how old I am, but it started in Hong Kong. So it did start out in Asia. I was a journalist, newspaper journalist, a sports writer, and I made my way into TV. But funnily enough, I started off working on an entertainment channel. So I would be more commonly found going to Hollywood and covering movie junkets. I'd be interviewing movie stars. I'd be doing entertainment stuff. What was interesting was that all the time that was going on, I still played a lot of sport, and I covered sport, in a different way, like a journalist in the background. And eventually, I started presenting sport on TV again.
Tell us when you made that decision to switch from entertainment to sports, and why did you switch?
Yeah, that's a very good question, Bolu, because what happened was, I had a lot of fun. Like I said, I was going to, I had a chance to fly to Hollywood or go to Tokyo to interview movie stars. So I was getting all the fun jobs. But what I really felt that was in my heart, sport was my real passion, because even though I did that job for a living, I found myself playing sport, talking about sport, watching sport. That was my passion. And as a result of that, I decided to combine the two, my passion and then my profession. By that stage, I felt I was comfortable on camera. I was also comfortable working behind the scenes because I did some work as a producer of sports shows for a couple of years before I started presenting it. And then an opportunity came along that saw me move from Hong Kong to Singapore. And that was to work with ESPN on their Asia-wide coverage. And that was when I worked on everything from Grand Slam tennis to major golf to cricket and rugby. And of course, I covered football. I covered Champions League football, Asian football. And then the big game changer was when my channel here in Asia won the rights to the Premier League. And that's when I became really associated with Premier League football. So long before I moved to the UK to work on the Premier League, I had been doing it for about 8 years, maybe 9 years here in Asia.
Fantastic. Now, let's talk about your switch from ESPN to the Premier League. Now, I understand the process involved in the Premier League production, the whole process there. I want you to enlighten our people. The process involved in that particular production of Premier League content to the world. We only get to watch you here. Some people don't know where you're broadcasting from. You are here in Africa, you are there in Europe, you are in Asia as well. What's the whole process all about?
It's a really weird situation that in terms of where I've broadcasted my life, very often I've worked in one country, but I haven't broadcast to that country. So when I was working in Singapore with ESPN, let's say, for example, we had the rights to Premier League football. Well, then we might not have the rights for Singapore, but we did for 20 other countries around Asia. So I kind of got used to being in one place but broadcasting to another. But what that meant was nobody knew where I was. Really, people were always wondering where I was. And it got even more confusing when I moved to UK, to London, to work on Premier League productions. So just in case anyone's still confused over there, and it can be confusing, because Premier League Productions is basically a not-for-broadcast in the UK international content service. And it's not a TV channel, it's a content service. So it's linear TV, but it's also digital content. It's also social media and what have you. And it's deliberately done in such a way that it's completely neutral. There is no branding upon it. So what happens is if you're an international broadcaster and you choose to take the content that comes out of the UK, it comes to you completely clean, as it were. You know, no graphics, no branding, no identity, and then you turn it into your own product, right? So that happens all over the world, and people watch it. But again, it causes confusion. So, for example, when I would come to Africa, people would... And no, I didn't. I didn't work for Sky in the UK because Sky and BT have the rights to the Premier League in the UK. They show that. They don't show what I was working on. So actually, nobody in the UK really knew me. Nobody really saw me on the television because what I was doing was going globally. It wasn't going out in the UK. And that was very interesting and sometimes a little bit confusing, particularly for people overseas who thought that I was some kind of, you know, Gary Lineker, Jeremy Clarkson, Gordon Ramsay style figure who was on the TV in the UK. Not the case. No, I was far more visible across huge parts of the globe than I was in Britain.
Yeah, I mean, forget about you not being visible in Britain. You are, of course, a worldwide brand. Now, what was it like working for such a big service like the Premier League, undoubtedly the biggest league in the world, and knowing that you are being watched not in the UK, but across the globe?
Yeah, and the thing about that was fascinating to me was because I had been working in Asia, when we first showed the Premier League in Asia, we went across a 26, 27 country footprint. So we had I had a huge legacy audience, as it were, particularly in the Indian subcontinent, which is a vast sports-loving market. So when I was in London, the major markets for us were Africa. Basically, the whole of sub-Saharan Africa took what I was on, the whole of the Indian subcontinent, certain other countries around Asia. We would also go to Canada. Initially, we would go to some Scandinavian countries. So we really had it covered. But it was fascinating because one of the things that happened was because of my association with Africa, that meant that I came and did some work. Because when it came to tournaments that were non-Premier League in the summertime, but my employers, the Premier League, preferred it if I worked for companies that were Premier League rights holders. Hence, I arrived in Africa and I worked through the 2014 World Cup with Ryan Giggs and with JJ Okocha and Sami Kufur and all the guys. And then, of course, 2 years later, I went to France and I covered Euro 2016 as well. And again, that was broadcast across Africa. So I've always had this tremendous affinity with Africa. And what's a little bit sad is that because I made my broadcast debut in Asia and because my family and my home is very much in Asia, Singapore's my home. My wife is Singaporean. My daughters were born here. Singapore's very much home. After 7 years in England, I took the decision that I wanted to be in the place where I felt I'd be for the rest of my life. So I came back to Singapore. Fortunately, I was offered work with Fox Sports, and I have been with them ever since out here in Asia. And that meant that, sadly, it meant I was no longer associated with my African viewers. And I still, to this day, on social media, I get a lot of people saying to me, why aren't you there anymore? Yeah. Why aren't you working for Sky or whatever? People don't quite get it. And I have to explain that I'm now based in Asia.
All right, John, let's talk about the show that has actually made you popular and actually thrown you out there to the world, and that's the Premier League Matchday Live, or let me call it Go Rush. How do you prepare for such a show? It's a live show and as spontaneous as possible because at that time you have to keep getting clips from the first half. You have to maneuver it and see how best to deliver it to the audience. How do you manage that production process?
Okay, right. Well, there's two things to point out. First of all, so Matchday Live is essentially what I did as a TV anchor. I mean, I see myself as a TV anchor. I do also commentate, and so the Gold Rush concept that came along was pretty much that one that came along with the commentary, where you sit on one game, but you run in highlights from another. That came later. That came really over the last 2 years of my time with the Premier League. But essentially, Bolo, I see myself as a sports anchor. And as a result of that, working on live Premier League football, particularly on a Saturday, was my favorite thing ever. Because it's a process that, as you know, doing this yourselves, starts earlier in the week. When you think about the kind of content you want to put together, you think about the structure of a show. And so that means that when you have a Saturday where you have 3 live games back to back to back, and that's a long day. It's a 12 noon start, sort of 8:30, 9 o'clock at night, right? So I would start that earlier in the week. I would plan for it. Then on the Saturday morning, I'm in the studios or I'm in the office by 9 o'clock. I'm making sure I've got my final thoughts together. We're rehearsing from about 10:30, and then we go live at 12 o'clock. Now, that first part of the show is fairly structured because you're talking about what's coming up during the day. But what I enjoyed more than anything was halftime, when you've got analysis coming in, and in particular between the games at 3 o'clock and say 5:30, when we have all the highlights coming in. And then Andy Townsend and I used to go to the touchscreen and we'd look at the highlights. Very often it was the first time we'd seen some of the stuff. So as a broadcaster, and I'm sure you'll appreciate this really challenges the things that I think are your core skills, which are you've got to be prepared, you've got to know your stuff, you've got to research, you have to have great understanding of how the production process works to communicate with your producer, your director, with every single component in the team. And then, of course, you also have to have the capacity to deliver in a hopefully compelling way the stories that you're telling, reacting to something and picking out the key significance. This thing happened at Aston Villa earlier on. You have to nail it straight away. Okay, why was that important? Was that a big talking point or not? And I think, to be honest with you, that's what I see myself probably as doing as my core strength. And that's what I think arguably I'd say I enjoy that more than anything else in broadcasting.
Thanks for sharing with us some of those basics of sportcasting there. Now let's talk about another aspect of your job, and as commentary, which you worked on at the tail end of your career in England. Let's talk about how you coped with pronunciations of names. At the time, I think it was at the World Cup, you had to work with the Icelandic team. How do you work with names pronunciation?
Okay, well, it's all about research, isn't it, now? And, I think as far as commentary is concerned, I'd always dabbled with commentary throughout my career. In fact, the very first piece of broadcasting I ever did was match commentary on Chinese Super League football. So, that's where I started out. But because I then became better known as a TV anchor and on-screen personality, that's what I did more. However, when the opportunity came along to do goal rush commentary, because that enabled me to be able to not just call one game, but also be able to quickly react to things that are happening with other games, put them into context, etc. That tapped into a skill set that I had to really refresh and really remind myself how to do. Commentary requires an awful lot of preparation. You talk about pronunciations, you just need to know. So what you do is at the start of every season, the Premier League go out and they get every player, every squad member of every club to stand in front of a camera and pronounce their name. So there's no excuse to get a name wrong these days. But of course, the key to commentary is identifying who that player is, maybe having a stat handy, but at the right time, analyzing the play as it goes, working with your co-commentator, and then in the goal rush format, it meant reacting to other bits and pieces that were coming along from other grounds as you were working. So I found commentary, really, really challenging, really enjoyable, but challenging. And, I think everybody out there has a favorite and has opinions. You see people talking about Peter Drury and John Champion and all these different people and what have you. Can I just say to everybody out there, you should respect and admire every single football commentator, because anybody who's working at that level has established a degree of competence that very few people in the world have. So I'm always in awe of those guys.
Oh, fantastic. Let's go into it more deeper and deeper. Let's talk about your most interesting interviews, really. I'm sure you've had so many. And I also want to know, how difficult it is to be an expert in football, cricket, tennis, MotoGP, a whole lot.
Well, to be honest, when I was Sorry, you just broke up a bit there. When I was growing up, I played all those sports. I was just that guy who played everything. So when I was a kid, I'd be playing cricket in the summertime. I'd be playing rugby and soccer in the football in the wintertime. I used to love track, so I would run cross country and I would do track and field. Anything. I played all sports. I watched all sports. I was really into it. So it wasn't too much of a stretch for me to work on some of those things like, tennis and even F1. I did F1 for a while. That's just a case of journalistically doing your research, making sure that you work and you know your stuff. And then, and as you know, working with the producer, because any broadcast is about the unity of the production. It's not about you as a presenter. It's not your show as such. It's the unity of the product. So, your producer has a vision of how the show has to happen. You help that. The guests are a huge part of that. So it's an ensemble piece and you have to put it together. Now, that's how I learned how to do that. Football was always something I specialized in because it was something I'd been hugely fond of since I was young. So, to suddenly be in a position where I would have Sir Bobby Robson or Ian Rush or Brian Robson, these were guys I grew up watching, sitting opposite me in a studio or even in an interview format, that became something that I absolutely loved. Now, thanks to my training as a journalist, and I really started out as a journalist as somebody who did interviews. And in those days, I did basically lifestyle interviews. I did a lot of feature-based stuff with entertainment people, but also people from all walks of life. I was always very comfortable with the basics of interviewing. So when I got a chance to interview somebody famous, be it Thierry Henry, who's over my shoulder here, doesn't make me an Arsenal fan. I just happen to love Thierry Henry at the time as a player, then it was just a real bonus because I was comfortable that I knew what I was going to do in the interview. And that's what I loved more than anything was getting hold of somebody who we all saw and all thought we knew about and trying to just elicit something from them that maybe we didn't know. So in Thierry's case, I interviewed him twice. Once when he was in his pomp at Arsenal, absolutely flying. And I went into the interview thinking to myself, is he going to be arrogant? Is he going to be just a little above all this? But actually, I'd done a bit of research on him, and I had a hunch that he wanted to talk about a few things that maybe you wouldn't have expected. So when I did speak to him, I made a point of talking about his upbringing, and he gave me the most fantastic interview talking about his relationship with his father, about the importance of positive male role models in life, and that was fascinating to me. He also spoke about life growing up in the suburbs of Paris, and he talked about race relations, and he talked about social mobility, and I found some of this stuff just truly wonderful. So that's when and I think you'd appreciate this as a broadcaster, as a journalist, that's when you feel really satisfied, when you've brought something out of somebody that hopefully really engages everybody.
Oh, fantastic. Let's talk about Liverpool's success story under Jürgen Klopp. What do you make of the whole revolution of Liverpool Football Club under Jürgen Klopp and how they've eventually conquered the world?
Well, it's something the whole world is talking about right now. And of course, the thing about this, Bolu, that's really interesting is we knew it was coming. I mean, no one thought Liverpool were going to blow that. It's just that they had a 30-year wait, then they had a 3-month wait, didn't they, for this to happen, which has kind of added to the poignancy. I covered this on my show here in Asia last night, and we decided to take an angle of looking at the bedrock, the foundation for this. And if you go back 10 years, that was when FSG bought Liverpool, right? And when they bought it, they were a mess. The club had debts of £351 million. They were way down. They were like third from bottom in the Premier League. I think on the day that they were sold, I think they were like third from bottom or something like that. They had players who just didn't seem to be Liverpool players, and they had a long way to go. So if you then step forward and then look to the arrival of Jürgen Klopp, such a prescient piece of business, such a great signing, he changed things, and he sat there, didn't he? And he said, in 4 years' time, we will have a title. And sure enough, he was proved right. So I'm fascinated about the way that this project has developed to the point that they could dominate Manchester City so much. It's only 2 years ago, City got 25 more points than them, right? 100 to 75. Yeah. And now the swing is enormous. Now they're 23 points clear. As we stand, it could end up being more. I just think this is a remarkable story, and boy, they deserve this Premier League title.
Their success, is it more of hard work of the players or that of the manager?
I think the two go hand in hand, don't they? I mean, if you study Jürgen Klopp, you discover that what he does as much as anything is he ensures that the players entirely buy into the way he sees life, not just football, life. And as a consequence, I think what's been fascinating for me was a year or two back, they would blow teams away. They were winning games big. They were defensively a little bit shaky. If you look at where this title was won, and this title was effectively won before Christmas, it was won in games like the Aston Villa game or the West Ham game. It was won with solid defensive performance, late goals. And I think when things like that, Bolu, happen, they come from that collective spirit. They come from that team unity, and they come from that dressing room that's entirely united, plus the faith of the supporters, plus that charismatic Klopp energy. I think it's all come together, and that's why it's been such a special season for them.
Now, let me bring out the fan in you, the football fan in you. Let's talk about the English national team. I mean, how strong do you think the current English side is? And how far do you think they can go from now to the next World Cup?
Well, it's hard to know right now because we haven't seen them for a while. And I think one of the best things that has happened is that over the last 6 months, we're seeing the growth of players like Jadon Sancho, Phil Foden, who I think is going to be an absolute superstar. And as a result of that, I think that even by the time they go into the next tournament, traditionally you'd have said we're looking at Harry Kane and Raheem Sterling. These are the guys that we're leaning on. I think we're seeing these incredibly talented young players coming through, and that's a product of the teams that succeeded at under 17, under 19, under 20, under 21 level. That generation's coming through. They're getting game time and they're playing. However, as someone who has been pained and hurt by England in the past, you just have this reservation about their defence. I just don't see. I mean, John Stones has gone backwards. Maguire, I think, unfairly gets criticised. They say, he's not an £80 million player. I don't think he was ever an £80 million player. That's just market forces at work there. I think he's a good, solid defender. You got Keane at Everton, who had a very hard time. I think England are absolutely blessed in the wide defensive areas, the wing back areas. But central defence for me is a problem, and I think that's why under Gareth Southgate, you're very likely to see them getting to the last four in tournaments. I think absolutely they'll do that. But whether or not they've got the defensive strength to keep out the best in the world still worries me. So you're kind of hoping that somebody comes through. Otherwise, I think across the rest of the pitch, England are blessed with talent right now, and they're going to be good for a few years.
Oh, fantastic. John, I still want to bring out the fan in you, that football fan in John Dykes. I want to bring it out. Lionel Messi or Cristiano Ronaldo for you?
I'm not that kind of a football fan, and I'm not that kind of a person in life. I find it very difficult when someone says, you've got to pick your favorite movie or your favorite band or your favorite actor. It's like, what? I don't do black and white so easy. I kind of like the gray area in between. However, I know where you're going with this. I think the thing that with Messi is that I'm old enough to have watched Maradona. Okay, and so when you watch Maradona, it was this ability he had to just dribble the ball, to do incredible things with the ball, and also, if you've ever seen that so-called impossible goal that he scored for Napoli, the free kick when he whipped it with his left foot, he had the ability to put those in as well. So I see that in Messi as well. Gets on the ball, just does things that are incredible, scores goals from free kicks. You go, fantastic. In Cristiano Ronaldo's case, you see somebody who always had a step over and a trick. Yeah, that was there. But then he became this physically immense player, who his hang time on a jump, his ability to score headed goals, the power in his shooting, his sheer appetite for goals is such that I think where I'm going with this is these two players are among the best we've ever seen. But I would hate to comparing the two of them and saying who's the best. It's effectively like apples and oranges, because I think what you're doing there is you're actually giving an insight into how you see football. So Gary Lineker, for example, ex-Barcelona player and one of England's finest ever players, he loves Messi. He won't hear anyone say anything about Messi being not the best in the world or the best ever. Now, he's entitled to that opinion because he knows his football, and he obviously knows, what it takes to be able to dribble around opponents at that level. I don't know. I've never played to that level. But I think it would be unfair on Cristiano Ronaldo to not have him in the conversation, because that man, by sheer force of determination, has made himself physically, talent-wise, and everything. And you talk to people at United who talk about what he did, the work he did to make himself what he is. Both are special players, but I think they are so different that I don't think I'm going to compare. If you were to compare Lewandowski and Zlatan, maybe, you can do that. I think that's a closer comparison. But I think Cristiano and Messi are very different footballers, and I think we just have to celebrate both of them, to be honest with you. There you go. I've avoided answering it.
All right, John. Now, John, I have to allow you, because I'm sure you have a lot of shows to prepare for and a lot of things to do at home. Now, John, on a final note, let's talk about the new normal in football, COVID-19 and football. How soon do you think we will have our football back? In less than 2 minutes, please.
Okay, so how soon will the football come back? I think what you mean by that is the football we knew with full stadiums and that whole fan experience. I think from country to country that differs. I'm watching developments in England with a lot of interest. You've got all these Liverpool fans that are meeting up every night, massing, and that really is in contravention of what they should be doing there. So you have to hope that there's no second wave, second spike there. And if there is, it will massively impact what happens. I think other countries have taken a very guarded approach to it, and you're hearing Spain talking about getting fans back into the stadiums with social distancing in place. You're talking about different sports and different codes around the world doing something similar. But I honestly think that I'm no medical expert, but this thing isn't going away anytime soon. You're not going to have a vaccine anytime soon. Weather around the world means that you could have, winter coronavirus outbreaks again. I don't think it's going to go away, and I think it could be a year or two before even if we ever get back to what we had before, it'll be a year or two before we're back to where we were in, say, January, February this year. And I think in the meantime, we just have to be grateful for whatever we do get.
John, I must say a very big thank you. I mean, it's an honor, really, to have you on the show today. I say to you this morning, I mean, you inspire a whole lot of broadcasters out here in Africa. Thank you very much, John.
Oh, it's a pleasure talking to you guys. Keep safe, keep well, everybody, and I'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you very much. There you have John Dykes, a veteran broadcaster and, of course, commentator, talking to us all the way from Singapore. Sean, I mean, let's move away from John and, of course, talk quickly about Liverpool. What